Women don't need to search for pain. It's embedded in their very biology. From the sharp ache of period cramps to the deep, consuming intensity of childbirth, pain is part of the female life cycle, a quiet presence that never entirely leaves. Unlike men, who often externalize pain into myth and morality, women internalize it, carrying it not just in the body, but in their roles, responsibilities, and rhythms of life. This isn't pain that announces itself with broken bones or blood. It's the kind that grows slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, woven through early obligations, swallowed emotions, and the silent pressure to be composed long after exhaustion sets in. Many women experience a body that whispers, something is wrong, even when tests say otherwise. There's the shifting ache that refuses to stay in one place, the exhaustion that arrives without warning and won't be soothed by sleep. These symptoms often get categorized with clinical terms: chronic, idiopathic, functional. But these labels feel more like question marks than answers. They imply exclusion, not understanding. They define the absence of clarity rather than the presence of cause. Over time, this ambiguity becomes more than frustrating. It becomes its own kind of illness, one that reshapes identity, relationships, and even how a woman sees herself. The temptation is always to split the emotional from the physical, to treat the body and mind as separate realms. But the lived reality says otherwise. Conditions like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome reveal the truth. Emotional memory, early stress, and sensitive nervous systems are not background noise. They're central to the experience. These conditions are not simply about muscles or hormones. They're about unresolved feelings translated into physical form. This video doesn't aim to prescribe a cure. Instead, it maps the complex terrain where emotion, memory, and biology meet, a place many women inhabit but rarely speak of. The goal is to offer not solutions, but language, to give shape to what often goes unspoken. Emotion, particularly when embodied by women, is so often misunderstood. It's either dressed up as mystic intuition or dismissed as melodrama. Rarely is it recognized for what it actually is: a biological regulation system. Emotion informs us when to act, when to retreat, when to rest. It works in tandem with logic, not against it, sculpting perception, steering memory, and prompting physical response. But culturally, women are taught to temper their emotions, to soften their sadness, dilute their anger, suppress their stress. From girlhood, they learn to smile through discomfort, downplay pain, and adjust their tone so they don't seem too forceful. The cost of these adjustments? A disconnection between feeling and expression that becomes so habitual, it feels like personality. This isn't just psychological, it's physical. The body does not forget what the mind conceals. It reacts, adjusts, and absorbs. Emotions that aren't fully processed don't vanish. They embed themselves, surfacing later as chest tightness, shortness of breath, or tension headaches with no obvious cause. In this way, the body becomes a kind of translator, expressing what words have failed to capture. It doesn't speak in metaphors, but in mechanism. The nervous system, immune responses, and hormonal fluctuations all register not just current stresses, but old ones, unresolved and unrecognized. And because this process is slow, it often escapes notice, until the body can no longer compensate. Suddenly, a woman finds herself battling fatigue that won't lift, pain that migrates like a ghost, or insomnia that no routine can fix. And though these symptoms are real and measurable, their origins remain elusive, often dismissed by doctors or misunderstood by loved ones. This happens not because the symptoms are imagined, but because the systems meant to interpret them, medical, cultural, even personal, aren't equipped to translate what the body is trying to say. From early childhood, girls are socialized to recognize that some emotions are more acceptable than others. Sadness is allowed, even expected. But anger, that's dangerous. It must be softened, redirected, turned into politeness or concern. Over time, this creates a subtle but profound shift. Women become fluent in the emotional dialect of others, while losing fluency in their own. They become experts at sensing what others can tolerate and reshaping their emotions accordingly. Not because they feel less, but because expressing more often carries consequences. Again, the impact is not just emotional, it's physiological. Repressed or reshaped emotions still move through the nervous system. The body still reacts, through heart rate, muscle tension, hormonal shifts. It doesn't need your verbal permission to respond. It already has. This is why emotional labor is so physically exhausting. Managing not just your own feelings, but those of everyone around you, is not just draining, it's metabolically expensive. And while it might not leave visible scars, it leaves traces in fatigue, in low immunity, in persistent aches. Many women's health issues aren't defined by one big trauma, but by a slow drip of self-sacrifice, adjustment, and unmet needs. By always being good, flexible, agreeable, and rarely fully, unapologetically angry. This constant self-editing begins to leave its mark in places where no permission is needed. In digestion, sleep, energy, and pain cycles. The cultural terrain of emotional expression becomes etched into the body. And for women, navigating that terrain often comes at a cost that's invisible until the body refuses to keep pace. There's something deeply ironic about how anger operates in women's lives. It's one of the most biologically useful emotions, an alarm system signaling when boundaries are crossed, when needs are unmet, when something must change. Yet for women, anger has become a forbidden language. It's not just discouraged, it's systematically erased. Anger in women is called irrational, hysterical.
Thanks so much for watching this far. If you're enjoying the video, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me. Feel free to drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think or how you relate to this. Your support keeps this channel going, and I truly appreciate you being here.
Emotional. When they express it, they're labeled unstable. When they suppress it, they're praised as mature. But anger, when harnessed correctly, is not destruction, it's direction. It tells you where the wound is. It tells you what matters. And for many women, reclaiming that anger is the first step in reclaiming their bodies and their narratives. Think about how early this begins. A girl is praised for being quiet, gentle, and polite. If she raises her voice, she's told to calm down. If she stands her ground, she's accused of being difficult. Slowly, she learns that maintaining harmony is more valuable than asserting herself. By adolescence, she becomes a master of emotional negotiation, able to read a room, anticipate reactions, and dial herself down to avoid conflict. But this self-moderation doesn't come free. It costs energy, authenticity, and eventually physical well-being. When anger is swallowed repeatedly, it doesn't dissolve. It simmers. It seeps into muscles, lingers in the nervous system, and alters the body's chemistry. It may emerge as irritability, fatigue, or unexplained pain. This isn't metaphorical, it's measurable. Cortisol levels, blood pressure, immune responses, they all reflect how emotions move through us, especially when they're trapped. And yet, when these symptoms arise, women are told to relax, to do yoga, to breathe. Rarely are they told to scream, or to say no, or to rage at what's been denied to them. But these expressions are not only valid, they are necessary. They are signs that something vital is still alive within. The self that remembers what fairness feels like. The self that knows how to fight back. Unfortunately, reclaiming anger isn't a clean process. It doesn't show up in tidy ways. It often arrives masked as sarcasm, withdrawal, burnout, or self-sabotage. These behaviors are misunderstood as personality flaws, but they are actually the smoke from a fire that's been burning unattended for years. And without space to name that fire, to understand its source, it continues to damage from within. What makes this even harder is that women are often each other's enforcers. The social codes that demand composure don't just come from men. Women too are conditioned to reward gentleness, compliance, and sacrifice. A woman who steps out of these boundaries, who chooses anger over accommodation, is often seen as selfish or aggressive, not by strangers, but by her peers. This internal policing keeps the system running smoothly and silently. But there comes a breaking point, a moment when the mask of pleasantness no longer fits, when the cost of suppression outweighs the risk of expression. This doesn't always look like a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's quiet, a refusal, a boundary, a simple, "I don't agree." And though the act may be small, its implications are seismic, because for a woman raised to be likable, even a whispered no can feel like a revolution. This is where healing begins, not with denial, but with discomfort. Real healing asks that we move toward what's painful, not away from it. That we listen to what the body is telling us, even if we don't yet understand it. Because the body remembers long before the mind can make sense. It carries the unfinished stories, the silenced cries, the ignored instincts. And unless we meet those memories with honesty, they will continue to shape our health, our moods, and our sense of self. The journey back to wholeness often begins with rage. Not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that stands up. The kind that says, "This is not okay," even if it's been normalized for generations. This kind of anger is not only allowed, it's sacred. It is the immune system of the soul, rising to reject what harms and defend what matters. But what happens when women finally let themselves feel this anger? At first, there's guilt. Centuries of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Many women feel selfish just for naming their needs. They worry that asserting themselves will lead to abandonment or judgment. And sometimes it does. Not every relationship survives the awakening of boundaries, but the ones that do, those built on respect, mutual care, and truth, become deeper, more honest, and far more liberating. Anger, when honored, becomes clarity. It reveals what you've tolerated too long. It shows you who listens when you speak. It unearths the parts of you that have been muted, ignored, or judged. And in doing so, it gives you back the right to define yourself, not by others' comfort, but by your own truth. Many women fear their anger will make them unlovable, but in reality, it makes them more fully known. It brings their whole selves to the surface, not just the parts that please, but the parts that protect. And that fullness, that integration, is the foundation of real intimacy. You cannot be truly loved until you are truly seen, and you cannot be seen while hiding behind silence. This is why emotional honesty is not indulgent. It's essential, especially for women whose identities have been shaped by service, adaptation, and caretaking. Honoring your anger isn't abandoning your values, it's realigning with your worth. It's saying, "I matter too," and allowing your life to reflect that. So let the anger rise. Let it move through your muscles, your words, your choices. Not in violence, but in truth. Not in chaos, but in clarity. Let it strip away what no longer fits and carve room for what's real. Because underneath every suppressed scream is a voice that still remembers how to say, "I deserve more." Freedom rarely arrives with a trumpet. Often, it enters quietly through discomfort, confusion, or the unexplainable urge to do things differently. For the woman who has spent years suppressing anger, overfunctioning, and tuning her nervous system to others' needs, awakening doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels disorienting, like waking up in a room you didn't know you fell asleep in. Suddenly, routines that once felt comforting now feel claustrophobic. Conversations she used to tolerate become unbearable. Her body begins to revolt against the mask she's worn for decades, by trembling, sweating, shutting down. This isn't weakness, it's emergence. The real self, long buried under compliance, is finally rising to the surface. But this stage, this middle, is messy. She's no longer the woman who stayed silent to keep the peace. But she's not yet fluent in speaking up without shaking. She's no longer blindly pleasing everyone. But she hasn't fully learned how to please herself without guilt. This is what psychologists call differentiation, the process of becoming emotionally distinct from others without cutting them off. It's the act of holding your own center, even when others try to pull you off balance. And it's terrifying, especially for women taught that safety comes from approval. At this point, many women ask, "Am I being selfish?" No, you're being self-aware. The question isn't whether you'll disappoint people, it's whether you'll abandon yourself to avoid it. This realization stings, because the fear of disappointing others is not irrational, it's been earned. Many women have been punished for speaking up, rejected for setting boundaries, shamed for saying no. These aren't imagined risks, they're remembered consequences. So healing must also include grief, not just for what happened, but for who you had to become to survive it. You grieve the friendships built on compliance, the career choices made to feel acceptable, the love you accepted because it was safer than being alone. This grief is essential. Without it, the old identity remains unfinished, like a house half demolished, but still inhabited. You can't rebuild on top of that. You must allow space for sadness, even regret. Only then can you choose consciously who you want to become next. In this liminal space, your body continues to be your loudest guide. You may find yourself crying for no clear reason, snapping at minor frustrations, feeling waves of joy, then plunges of exhaustion. This is your nervous system recalibrating, learning to stop fighting and start feeling. For years, it only knew survival. Now it's learning to trust that you won't abandon yourself again, that you will listen to its cues instead of overriding them. That rest is not laziness. That anger is not betrayal. That discomfort is not danger, it's data. One of the most radical steps in this process is learning how to rest. Not the performative rest of a Sunday afternoon nap, while your to-do list haunts you, but the deep, cellular rest that comes from feeling safe in your own skin. This kind of rest is only possible when you stop outsourcing your worth, when you stop proving, explaining, apologizing, when you finally say, I don't need to earn the right to be here. Of course, this doesn't happen all at once. Some days you'll feel powerful, certain, grounded, alive. Other days you'll backslide, people please, overwork, bite your tongue. This isn't failure, it's practice. You are building new neural pathways, new stories, new standards for how you want to be treated. Not just by others, but by yourself. There's also loneliness here, because when a woman changes, her environment often doesn't. Friends who once leaned on her emotional labor may withdraw when she stops offering it freely. Family members may question her new attitude. Partners may feel threatened when she asks for more than she's accepted in the past. And that hurts. It makes you question everything. But pain is not always a signal to return to comfort. Sometimes it's a sign you're growing beyond what comfort ever gave you. You begin to crave new kinds of connection, not just intimacy, but authenticity. People who don't flinch at your boundaries, who aren't intimidated by your strength or your sorrow, who ask how you really feel and stay to hear the answer. You also begin reconnecting with parts of yourself that were exiled long ago. The playful self, the intuitive self, the sensual self, the wild, wordless, unfiltered self. Not every part returns at once. Some are shy, some are angry. Some test you first, asking, will you make room for me now? Will you let me speak without shame? Will you protect me this time? And when you answer yes, not perfectly, but consistently, you start to feel whole in a way you never thought possible. This is not the end of your transformation. It's the thick of it. You are no longer lost. You are remembering, not just recovering from pain, but reclaiming the power you once had to numb to survive. Now it's yours again, not just to endure life, but to create it. What does it mean to finally live from your truth after a lifetime of twisting, minimizing, and accommodating? It doesn't mean you become fearless. It means you no longer abandon yourself in the face of fear. It doesn't mean the world suddenly becomes kinder. It means you stop betraying your body to belong in it. Living from truth is not a one-time event. It's a daily decision. A decision to check in instead of check out. To ask, what do I want? Even when you've been trained to only ask, what do they need? This kind of life can look boring on the outside. There's less drama, fewer breakdowns. But inside, it's rich with detail. Emotions no longer shout to be heard. They arrive like trusted guests. Sadness is not a crisis, it's a visitor. Anger is not a weapon, it's a compass. Joy doesn't need to be earned, it simply gets to be felt. This is the life many women never realized they were allowed to have. Not a perfect life, but a present one. One in which they no longer perform the version of themselves that pleases everyone, but instead, embody the one that honors them deeply. Of course, old reflexes linger. You may still catch yourself people-pleasing or apologizing for things that aren't your fault. You may still feel guilt when you say no, but now you notice it. And noticing is power. It's the shift from living on autopilot to living in awareness. With this awareness comes an entirely new relationship with your body. You stop seeing it as an obstacle to discipline or a project to fix. You begin to see it as a messenger, a wise, reactive, responsive organism that has always been trying to keep you safe, even when its signals were inconvenient or misinterpreted. You learn to ask your body, do you feel safe here? Are you tired or just overstimulated? Do you need food, rest, movement, or stillness? You stop overriding your symptoms with productivity. You stop mistaking burnout for strength. You stop using perfectionism to hide your pain. Instead, you become curious. You ask not, what's wrong with me? But, what happened to me? Not, why can't I handle this? But, where did I learn that I had to? And in that shift, something softens. Self-compassion becomes not a concept, but a reflex. You begin to treat yourself like someone worth protecting. Not because you finally met some invisible standard, but because you realize you never had to. There's a quiet miracle in that, to become your own ally instead of your own enemy. You begin to forgive yourself for the years you spent surviving, for the masks you wore, for the truths you buried just to stay afloat. That forgiveness becomes fuel. It doesn't erase what happened, but it releases you from carrying the weight of shame for how you coped. You also start to recognize that healing is not linear, it's cyclical. There are relapses, regressions, days where old habits roar back louder than you expect. But you meet them differently now, not as signs of failure, but as invitations to deepen your understanding. You no longer confuse discomfort with danger. You no longer confuse being alone with being unlovable. This is where the deepest form of strength reveals itself, not in how much you can hold, but in how willing you are to let go. Let go of roles that aren't yours to play. Let go of narratives that aren't yours to carry. Let go of expectations that shrink your joy to fit someone else's comfort. In this shedding, you make space. Space for your own voice, not the echo of others. Space for rest that doesn't require justification. Space for love that doesn't punish you for your boundaries. This kind of space invites a different kind of love. One that sees all of you, not just the convenient parts, not just the generous or pretty or easy to understand parts, but the full spectrum. The flawed, grieving, messy, radiant whole. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all is this. When you stop trying so hard to be good, you become profoundly human. Not perfect, but real. And realness is what liberates others too. Because when one woman stops apologizing for her truth, it gives every person around her permission to do the same. Her courage is contagious. Her clarity sharpens the room. Her wholeness makes space for other people's wholeness too. This is how healing becomes collective, not through rescue, but through reflection. Not through preaching, but through presence. You don't need to explain your journey to everyone. You only need to embody it. To live it with such integrity that your very existence challenges the systems that try to silence you. And when that happens, something truly beautiful unfolds. You stop living a life of reaction and begin living a life of creation. You speak because your voice matters. You rest because your body deserves it. You say no because you trust yourself. You say yes because you're no longer afraid of what that yes might cost you. This is the final liberation. Not that the world changes, but that your relationship to it does. You stop waiting for permission. You stop asking if your truth is valid. You stop seeking worth in someone else's reflection, and instead, you rise in your softness, your rage, your desire, your stillness. You rise not because it's heroic, but because it's finally safe. You rise because you are no longer hiding. You are home.